After trading for both Kevin Durant last year and Bradley Beal this offseason, the Phoenix Suns have gone all in. We all know that. But what we didn't know was that somehow Phoenix was going to find a new way to go even more all in and trade away even more stuff in the pursuit of a championship this season. And not only have they done this in a way that nobody else has done before, but also in a way that nobody else has really thought of before. Now, after trading for Durant and then also trading for Beal this offseason, the Suns had no assets left. They traded away all their first round picks in the Durant trade, including one pick swap. They traded away all their pick swaps, as well as whatever second round picks that they had left in the Beal trade. They had no young assets outside of DeAndre Ayton and Devin Booker, of course, but they're going to keep those guys for this team. They had nothing left. Then, of course, they did really well in free agency. I talked about that in a previous video, but then they somehow managed to acquire a couple of second round picks and some other assets that are going to help them bring in some players mid-season. And the way that they did it has never been done before. Let's go ahead and put on screen the first round pick situation for Phoenix moving forward. As I said, they don't have any access to any of their first round picks or their pick swaps as a result of the Beal and the Durant trades, yet they still were able to trade away even more of their pick swaps after already trading them away once. And not only were they able to do that, but they were also able to receive second round picks and other assets in the process. And you might be wondering how exactly that is possible. Well, they just traded the pick swaps over again. Now, let me explain briefly how a pick swap works in the NBA. So you're not allowed to trade first round picks in consecutive seasons in the NBA. If you trade your 2025 first round pick, you are not allowed to trade away your 2026 first. You have to pick in the first round at least every other year in the NBA. It is a rule. You are not allowed to give away that many first round picks. But what you are allowed to do, and what has happened over the last couple of seasons, is offer a team the right to swap first round picks in a given year. So you can trade your 2025 first round pick, and then you can offer to swap in 2026 based off of where you fall in the standing. So if you have the 25th pick in a given draft and you have a pick swap right with the other team and they are picking 28th, then suddenly they are 25th and you're 28th if they own your first round pick swap. That's something that Phoenix has done to get KD partially and then to get Beal. That's something that the Nets did in order to get James Harden. It's something the Nets have done previously in Jaylen Brown and Jason Tatum trades when they got Kevin Garnett and Paul Pierce. It's something that has happened for years and years and years. But what Phoenix just did has actually never happened, because they went ahead and said, yes, we owe pick swaps to Brooklyn and to Washington, but now we're going to bring in another team into that pick swap scenario in order to try and get some second round picks. So they called up Memphis, they called up Orlando and said, hey, would you like to also have our pick swap in the year whatever's on screen, right? The 2026, 2028, whatever the case may be. They're just adding another team into the line of pick swaps. So for example, in 2026, Phoenix has its own first round pick, the Wizards have their own first round pick, and Orlando has their own first round pick. Essentially, Phoenix went from, okay, Washington and us can swap first round picks in 2026. Washington gets the more favorable of those two picks as a part of the Beal trade. But then they went to Orlando and said, you guys can get in on this as well. So in exchange for some second round picks, some other assets, now in 2026, this is how the first round pick extravaganza swap goes. The most favorable pick goes to Washington in 2026. The second most favorable pick goes to Orlando in 2026. And the least favorable of all three of those teams, the lowest first round pick of all three of those teams, goes to Phoenix, which basically created an asset out of thin air. Now, that's a very complicated way to basically say that in these years that are not the first round picks that they just owe straight up to Brooklyn, in these years that Phoenix is going to be picking in the first round, 2026, 2028, they are just at the back of the line for whatever first round picks come up. It might mean nothing. It might be a non-asset. They might finish with the 25th pick in that year, and Orlando and Washington might be worse than them and it won't matter, or it could really matter if the team falls apart completely. And the whole reason that they did this is because they're already so all in on this season as it is, so why not try and go even more all in? They're getting back second round picks. They're not great second round picks, but they're getting back a handful of them with the mindset being, once we get to the trade deadline, there are going to be players out there that are going to be bought out, that are maybe just going to get salary dumped, and Phoenix is going to have a couple of second round picks, but more importantly, some trade exceptions that they've created to be able to take on a medium-sized salary onto their roster and add potentially a key rotation player. Think Eric Gordon last year, think Terrence Terrence Ross last year. These are guys that are just getting dumped by teams mid-season that could really, really help Phoenix. And in their mind, it makes more sense to go ahead. They're already out on the pick swap. They already are not going to get the most favorable of those picks in 26 28. So in their mind, why not bring in another team, get back second round picks, which is a more tangible asset to a team at the deadline. And then if there's a player that's making $15 million a year that's just going to get cut, or could actually be a rotation player for Phoenix, whatever the case may be, which happens every single year, Phoenix can say, hey, don't cut them. We'll give you 2 second round picks. We'll take them into the trade exception, and it's all the same to you. And it's a really interesting way to just create an asset out of nothing. Now, the downside to this for Phoenix is very obvious. It's the same as when they already owe the pick swaps to Washington and all these other teams, is that if in 2026, for example, things fall apart for Phoenix quickly, let's say Durant gets hurt or guys want to leave, or it's just not a good situation. Let's say the Phoenix has an injury riddled year and they're, a bottom 15 team in the league. They're a lottery team, right? In that season, maybe Washington or Memphis or Orlando, and depending on the year that you go here, could swap with Phoenix. And now Phoenix, despite being bad, goes all the way to the back of the first round, and potentially maybe Memphis makes the Western Conference Finals, in one of these seasons, and then they get to jump up and take Phoenix's pick. That is the risk here that Phoenix is making, and it's a big one, but they're already kind of making that risk in the first place because they already owe the swap to Washington anyway, so why not just get another team involved? But here's the thing that is really, really interesting to me about all this is Phoenix is leveraging these pick swaps to get second round picks to try and get players at the trade deadline to really try and go all in this year. But they still get to draft a player in those years, in 24 and 26 and 28. Just because you're swapping picks doesn't mean you're losing your pick entirely. So they can still pick a player potentially in the 20s of the draft if they end up having to swap or not swap. And then they still have that asset. After the draft, they can trade that player for a variety of different things. And so you're still retaining the asset. It's just a little bit worse because of the risk that you're putting yourself through, potentially owing a pick swap to a team that finishes better than you in the standings, but then gets to trade picks with you within the first round. It's a very complicated way of saying that essentially the Suns are going even more all in than any team in the history of the league has ever gone. Teams have done all their picks and all their swaps before, but no team has ever done all their picks, all their swaps, and then also swaps on those swaps and no second round picks just to get second round picks just to try and add a rotation player. And it's risky, but at this point, if you're Phoenix, everything is already risky. And if these moves, this flexibility that it provides is enough to put you over the top and win you the title, then it will all be 100% worth it. Now, make no mistake about it, I'm sure there are Suns fans watching this video that are very nervous about what these moves mean for the future of their team. If things fall apart quicker than you might think that they will, it's going to look really, really bad. I mean, you could realistically be, a Suns fan in 2026 or 2028, and you could have one of the worst rosters in the league because you have no future picks. Maybe Durant, and Beal just aren't that good anymore, or they get traded, or they're old and they're injured, or whatever the case may be. You could realistically be a bottom 10 team in the league and not have access to your first round picks. Like, there's a situation here where if Washington or Orlando or Memphis, one of these teams is really, really good a couple years from now and Phoenix is really, really bad, they're just picking at the end of the first round like a good team despite being a bad team. And it is, I can attest to this as a Nets fan, it's not a fun place to be. It happened with them post KG and Paul Pierce trades, and it definitely puts yourself at risk. However, I'm of the opinion that at this point, the extra pick swap doesn't mean that much to you, and if it can ultimately result in a rotation player for you on a team that desperately needs depth, it could really pay off in a big way. And mostly to me, it's just really interesting. Teams finding new ways to build their roster and to create assets out of thin air is one of the most interesting parts of team building to me in the NBA. And I cannot wait to see not only how this works out, but if other teams choose to adopt this in the future.